Okay, welcome everyone. Today we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're gonna take a look back at the Shadowbringers Raids and we're gonna discuss what they did well and what they could improve on while ranking them. So this is gonna be my ranking and I'm gonna consider the fight as they came out, and I'm gonna use 4 criteria. The first one is gonna be the mechanics, and I'm gonna consider 2 aspects. First one being during prog. So the first time you see the mechanics, you discover how it works, you discover the timings you can work around, and then during re-clears. Sometimes a mechanic is really fun the first time, but it's really not fun to do every week. And I'm thinking in one fight in particular, where the first clear was really fun, but then the re-clears were kind of a snooze fest. Maybe you can tell which fight I'm talking about, you can put it in the comments below. And first is gonna be the role or group specific. By that, I mean maybe your job has a burst window that doesn't align well with the fight, or maybe your role, tank, healer, DPS, has something that is not really fun to do in a fight. As a note, I did the first tier in Party Finder, and I was quite late to the tier 2. I think I started week 6 and I cleared week 7 or 8. And then the next 2 tiers, I did them on release with a static. Now let's get into it. E1S or Eden's Gate Resurrection. Now it's pretty fun because I've had this discussion quite a few times with people. What's your favorite fight? What's the fight you like the least? And no one, absolutely no one mentions E1S. And I can understand why. It's not a flashy fight. It's not gonna be anyone's favorite. But I still think it's the perfect introduction to Savage for the expansion. Why? Because you have a lot of mechanics covered. For the tanks, you have tank swaps, you have a lot of damage to take, so you have mitigation. You have to bait the beams away from the party. You have to use interrupts on the ads. And a good thing is you don't have to move the boss too much. For healers, you need to stack properly. You need to give a dot over to the tank. You need to heal the tanks and the party. You need to heal a dot on the tank. And even for the DPS, you have stuff to do. You have to drop the puddle outside so you don't drop them on the party. You have to bait orbs. You have to bait the spinning orbs later, especially for the ranged people. I think it was interesting. It doesn't shine, it doesn't have any memorable mechanics, but it's still an interesting fight. So for that reason, I'm gonna put a very solid B. Like B is gonna be, it's a good fight, the baseline. If it's below B, that's disappointing. If it's above B, that's a fight I really enjoyed. Let's continue. E2S, Eden's Gate Descent. Now that one is a bit of a weird one. You had 2 main mechanics for that fight. One being the delayed stack or spread markers, and the other one being the ads that spawn and go over the arena, and that would give you damage down. Now on paper, that fight is fine. No, in my experience in Party Finder, I had really a bad time in Party Finder. And I think it's because I was late and I was doing it Party Finder. If I was with a static group, or if I was earlier to the fight, maybe with a little bit more skilled people, it would have been much more fine. But I found myself hitting Enrage so many times because we just didn't have the damage. People took too many hits and had too many damage downs. It's also the fight that made me wanna be the main tank, because boss positioning is very important in that fight, and I was trusting myself more than a random tank. So if I was to rank it directly after progging and after clearing it, I really didn't have a nice time. So I came back to it later with a group, still during the tier, but to get more gear, and it was not that bad, so I'm gonna put it at C. Maybe it would deserve B if I didn't have such a bad experience with it, but I'm gonna put it in C. Now after that comes E3S, also known as Leviathan. I don't have much to say, it's a very good fight. I spent so much time on E2S through Party Finder that when I finally got to that one, I think I cleared it in one night. I was so ready for that fight. One new thing I would say is the healing check. The group would get together and then move, dropping AoEs, and then you would have to heal a lot. That's the first time I think the healers are really tried on their healing. Very solid fight. Quite enjoyed it, and I think a lot of people shared that emotion. No Titan, good memories. I really like that fight. Gonna be an easy S for me. For once, I think that was a really good fight to do in Party Finder, because you have 3 phases, and the hardest of the phases is definitely the first one. So you would get a group together, and either you can get through the first phase fine, and then you have very good chance to make good prog and to actually clear the fight, or you would wipe repeatedly on the first phase and people would leave the Party Finder pretty quick. Now, on to the second tier with E5S, Eden's Verse Fulmination. I have no problems with the mechanics of that fight. Maybe when you have to disengage, that wasn't the funnest. Not very melee friendly. What I have a problem with is the tank job was not really fun. First, the main tank, you needed to move the boss around the arena because it would teleport to the edge and then you have to move it back to the middle. What was not fun for me is that would line up with my own burst, and it's really annoying to move the boss while you have to do your damage properly. And also the boss casts a lot because it has a mechanics where it buffs itself, but then you have 2 cast bars. And it would just stop in the middle, would make 2 steps and then stop again, do his thing. So I would have enjoyed it a lot more if either the boss didn't move to the edge with you after certain mechanics, or if it would come back immediately to the middle. That would have been a lot more fun to me. And I think it might have been even worse as the off-tank, because the off-tank has an ads that appear and that will link to him, it will follow him, and if it touches him, you die. So basically the off-tank has to run around the boss, around the arena. I think was not fun to do for the tanks. For that reason, I would give it a C. It was not the best fight for me. And talking about it, we have the next fight, E6S Eden's Verse Furor. Once again, I'm fine with most of the mechanics, though I really find that fight is not melee friendly. You have to disengage a lot and you need the whole party to be on point for your melees to have their uptime. I'm not gonna keep waiting. For me, that's clearly my least favorite fight. Most of that comes from being a tank, and I have 2 things I don't like. First is the concussion mechanics. If you get 2 stacked, you get concussed and you cannot move for a very long time. I think it was something like 15 seconds and you're gonna eventually die to other mechanics. And that could happen because of no fault all year round. You would see it coming, you would know you're gonna get concussed. It was really not fun. The other one is to add insult to injury. You had to bait orbs outside the arena. Not being able to hit the boss and be there for like 10 to 15 seconds, really not fun. Now, E7. This fight is a bit weird because it was both a great fight and a huge disappointment. Great fight because the first time you do it, the mechanics with the portals is actually pretty fun. For me, it was really fun to do. And a huge disappointment because that's the fight I was mentioning in the intro. It's really a snooze fest. Once you learn how the fight works, there is very little variation. It's always the same fight. There is no variation. So I would say from the progging, first time you clear it, it's a really fun fight. Easy DNA. But the re-clear potential is really low, so I have to downgrade it to a B. Some people even say would put it lower, like C or D. I still like the fight, so put it at B, but I'm very disappointed because it would easily be an A or even an S with some improvements. What improvements, for example? First, switch the portals. They always appear in the same way, like the same color on the same side. Swap the portals when they appear. It was always alternating colors. Maybe just put 2 colors, one after the other. Make the portals appear from the left too. They do that in the normal fights, but in Savage, they always come from the right. Like the hardest part, where you had so many portals, you had color stacks on you, you had puddles. It looked very complicated the first time you do it, week 1. And then you realize there is only 2 options. Either you move every time or you don't move at all. Everyone does the same mechanic. So you could have everyone go to one corner, then one person figures the mechanic, and everyone does the same. It's not really interesting to me. Would it be more interesting if you had to pay attention to your own colors, your own debuffs, and to do your own thing? Not everyone does the same. How could you have done that? Maybe you make people have to spread so that you need to go to each corner. You could have done that with, for example, breaking the tiles if you have too many people on them, or making them change color. You could have had, for example, puddles. The puddles always change your color, but maybe you could have like 4 puddles that change color and 4 puddles that don't change color. So you have 2 variations. So much potential. Like, I could see that fight being an S easily, but it's just a shame that it has to sit as a low B. And now the last part of the tier, E8S, also known as Shiva. It took a lot of heat because of the cutscene in the middle. I'm not gonna talk about it, either you like it or you don't. Regarding the mechanics, it had a lot of good mechanics. I like the mirrors. I like the dragon zone. When you have the dragon head rotating around the arena, the first person has to go through the head to drop a puddle on the ground, and the second one has to pick up that puddle. I like the enrage, where you have to do that mechanics and the tank busters and the stack share. That was pretty epic to do when you did it properly. And the ad phase was pretty interesting. I think it's the most interesting ad phase in the game. Okay, no. You have U-Cup ad phase, but that's basically 2 tier boss fighting at the same time, and that's ultimate content. So that's a little bit different, but it's definitely... Shiva's ad phase is the most interesting Savage ad phase. The ad phase was interesting because you had to manage stuns on mobs, interrupts on other mobs, and then the damage. And the damage was pretty important because, especially week 1, week 2, tanks and healers didn't really have the damage to kill the ads by themselves. So they needed either both of them to go onto one ad, or they needed the DPS to help. And then the DPS cannot blast all the cooldowns because you have many ads, you have 4 waves. And also the composition, you needed to spread the group in 2, and the way you split it was kind of interesting. You kind of needed the range physical on the west group because you had 2 interrupts very close to each other, so the tank could not take both, so you needed another person to interrupt. And you kind of wanted the region healer to be on the east side because the east side had mobs that reflected damage onto you, and it was really hard, for example, for a scholar to heal the group fast enough. So you really prefer to have the scholar on the west group. That was really interesting. Now, 2 things I didn't like about that fight. First, and I never like that, it's the icy floor. I just find it a cheap mechanic. I don't like that you slide around the arena. The second one is light rampant. Light rampant, I'm actually fine with the idea of the mechanics that you need to be hit a certain number of time, that you gain stacks, but you don't want too many stacks because at 5 stacks you explode and you kill everyone. The part I'm not fan of is actually the orbs following you. I feel like the collision is just weird, and I would have preferred it to be made otherwise. 2 ways I see it could have worked is first static orbs at cardinals, where you just have to run through. Maybe you're linked to one orb and you have to run through that orb to give you the stack. That would have been fine. Or you need to bait the orbs to the outside so you don't shoot the people in the middle. That would have been fine too. It's just, I don't like the orbs following you. For the melee uptime especially, it was pretty bad in a fight where melee uptime was already a bit difficult. So for that reason, it's gonna be an A. Now, last tier, Eden's Promise. First fight, Eden's Promise Umbra E9S. I think it's a fine fight. I wasn't a big fan of the actual floor tile mechanics, where if you have too many people, you die. Especially for a first fight in the tier, because that must have been hell in Party Fighter. Especially if you die during the tile phase, you cannot really res, otherwise you're gonna kill the person that resed you. That's pretty awkward. Still a decent fight. I'm gonna put it in the B tier above E1. Here, I think it fits pretty well. E10S, Eden's Promise Litany. I like that fight. I liked the shadow mechanics, where you would have to pay attention both to what the cast bar said and what the shadow was facing to know which side was safe. I'm kind of debating to put it between A and B, but I think I'm gonna put it A. That was a very fun fight. I also like the part where you drop the shadow behind you, and later on into the fight you actually need to use that shadow to solve the mechanic. I think that was a pretty clever use. E11. No, E11, I can't help but draw a comparison to E7. E11 is what E7 could have been. They've done so much good stuff with it. That's definitely gonna be an S for me. I don't have much to say. Like, you have times where the tank take a bomb, they're gonna explode, they need to disengage for the party. But unlike in E6, where you had no choice but do nothing for 10 seconds, you had ways for the tanks to keep hitting the boss while being away from the party. Just if you move the boss smartly and work with your Kotek. So that was really fun. Two things to say that I wasn't a huge fan of. The first thing, the prismatic shift towards the end of the fight, where the boss just disappears and there's nothing going on. You just have to go to the edge, see if there is a sword there or not. I would have preferred the boss to be there so you can keep hitting it. It's a break in the fight. I would have preferred to keep fighting all the way through. Maybe you could hit the boss and then the ranged players have to go through the arena to figure out a safe spot or something. And the second thing is even more minor, but the very first mechanic is not random, and that bothers me. Even in the normal version, the safe spot could be either red or blue, but in Savage it's always blue. Like, there is no variation, it's always blue. I think for Savage there should be a bit of randomness, so I would improve on that. And E12, well, it's the fight that takes all the fights and mixes them together. Pretty solid S tier. I really like that the door boss and the next fight are very different. I would say that the door boss has pretty easy mechanics. Like, you understand what's going on, but it's pretty hard to execute. Especially lions. Like, if you have done E12S, you will know what lions are. You understand that lions are gonna shoot you, but it's pretty hard to execute. And the second part is the reverse. The mechanics seem really complicated at first, but once you figure out what's going on, then they're pretty easy to execute. Especially the relativity. You see a lot of debuffs, but in the end it's pretty easy to execute. And I liked that they brought back the previous boss as Titan and Shiva, and that it doesn't kill the rhythm of the fight. Like, they appear pretty quick and you keep hitting the boss, like it doesn't go away, you just keep fighting. I really like that about the fight. So that's gonna be it for my ranking. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to make your own ranking, link is in the description below. Have a nice day.